This is Dr. Rebecca Glazier. I'm an associate professor in the School of Public Affairs at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and I'm the primary investigator on the 2016 Little Rock Congregation Study. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about our results today. The Little Rock Congregation Study began with a research question. How do the community and political activities of religious organizations influence their congregants? And as I began to look into this question, I found some really interesting research on public health. It turns out that if churches host health screenings, their congregants become healthier. And this happens even if the congregants don't attend the health screenings. It's like the church creates a culture of healthiness. I wanted to know, does the same thing happen for community and political engagement? Do churches that are locally active improve the community engagement of their congregants? Do sermons on political issues increase political involvement? Do politically engaged churches raise the political efficacy of their members? I started looking into these questions in 2012 when my students and I worked with 5 churches in the Little Rock city limits to better understand their political and community engagement. We were able to collect survey data from 274 respondents across these 5 churches in 2012. In 2016, I wanted to expand the study to be able to reach a more diverse sample of religious organizations. And so I partnered with Dr. Warigia Bowman at the Clinton School of Public Service, and she brought her graduate students together with the students from my research practicum course, and we were able to work with 17 different places of worship across the city of Little Rock in 2016 and reach 1,474 respondents. This ambitious research design began by mailing clergy surveys to all 392 churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples within the city limits of Little Rock. We received 84 surveys back from clergy members, and the graduate students worked to conduct 69 in-depth interviews with those clergy members. We worked with 17 congregations across the city and across the religious spectrum to distribute surveys just before the 2016 election, and then we conducted 15 focus groups with congregation members in the weeks that followed. We're so incredibly grateful for the clergy and the worshipers who allowed us into their sacred space and talked with us about the religious and the community topics that were so close to their hearts. It was really an honor to learn about them and to have them trust us enough to share that with us. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the army of research assistants, students, and volunteers who helped make this project possible. We couldn't have done it without you. Okay, so I'd like to tell you a little bit now about the wonderful congregants that we surveyed. In terms of demographics, our nearly 1,500 respondents, many of whom were attending religious services 2 days before the 2016 presidential election, were really quite diverse. As you can see, there were a variety of religious traditions represented in the 2016 Little Rock Congregation Study from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. We were excited to have churches from across the city. Some of them were quite rural. Some of them had very small congregations, maybe 40 or 50 people worshiping together. Others had thousands of people who attended every week. So although this is not representative of all of the religious organizations in Little Rock, it really is a great diverse cross-section of Little Rock's religious community that we were able to work with. So what did we ask these congregants? One of the key things we asked them about was political activity. So we asked people how frequently they did each of these 10 political activities, including things like donating money or attending a rally. The most popular political activity by far was persuading someone else to vote, followed by posting something political on social media. And although the average age of our respondent was 54, letters to the editor were not very popular in terms of political activities. So we added up the score for each respondent in terms of their political activities to create an overall measure of how active they were in the community. We want to know what things religious organizations might do that lead people to be more politically active. So this is one of our key outcome variables. Another important measure in the study is community engagement. How involved are people in their community? The data shown here is the percentage of people who strongly agree with 4 key statements on community involvement, including I do things to help make the community a better place, and I talk with family and friends about community problems. This is another one of the major outcome variables of the study. We want to better understand what makes people more engaged in their communities, trying to improve them, talking about them, increasing awareness of community problems, and so on. And we want to see if there's anything that religious organizations might be doing to boost that community engagement of their members. Finally, we asked about political efficacy. And political efficacy is really important to political scientists, and it should be to anyone who cares about democracy. It's an indicator of the broader health of civil society, and it's really foundational to democracy. If we want democracy to work, people have to believe that their voice matters. And so we measure efficacy here with 2 questions: agreement with a statement that I can make a difference in my community, and one about I can understand government. It's not too complicated for me to understand. The 3 outcome variables we're most interested in here are political activity, community engagement, and political efficacy. What might places of worship be doing that could influence individual respondent scores on these 3 measures? Well, religious leaders could be talking about political and social in their sermons. So we asked people about the kinds of messages they heard in worship service over the past year. And they fell generally into 3 categories. The first was sermons about political activities. And these were messages that people heard from their religious leaders about getting involved in local or national issues or registering to vote. The second category is about community involvement. These were messages about volunteering in the community or helping those less fortunate here or around the world. The final category were messages from clergy members about political topics. These are sometimes divisive issues such as abortion, same-sex marriage, and religious freedom. Thing that places of worship might be doing to boost these different scores for their members is actually engaging in their communities. And so because multiple choice questions can't tell us everything we need to know, this qualitative engagement score was based on in-depth interviews with clergy, focus groups, multiple congregation site visits by the students, and other observations. Using all of that qualitative data, we assigned a numeric code to the places of worship we worked with in order to quantify the extent of their community engagement. This was scaled from 1 to 5, with higher numbers meaning more engagement. So using these data that I've talked about today, we can answer questions about whether the messages and actions of religious organizations can influence their congregants to greater political and community engagement. That with some statistical models. The outcome variables, as I mentioned, are political activity, community engagement, and political efficacy. The variables of interest are the sermons that urge political activity, the sermons that urge community involvement, and the sermons on political topics, in addition to that qualitative community engagement score. And for those of you who are interested in model specifics, I did include control variables for ethnicity, gender, income, ideology, age, and religiosity. I won't talk much about them in this presentation because it's geared towards the general public, but some of them are significant predictors of the behaviors we care about, and if they are, they're noted in the slides. So I'm excited to tell you a little bit about what we learned from these congregations. First, what predicts political activity? Well, sermons urging political activity. So this is a really interesting finding because we see that when clergy members are delivering messages encouraging their members to be active in the community or to go out and vote, that actually is leading to higher levels of political activity. We see the same effect also for sermons on political topics. When people hear these topics that potentially are really a little bit controversial, they may be urged to more political activity. What predicts community engagement? Well, again, here we have a link between the messages that are coming from the worship services and the activities of the congregants. So sermons urging community involvement lead to more community involvement by the members. Additionally, that qualitative engagement score, being part of a community engaged place of worship, also leads to higher levels of individual community engagement. Interestingly, sermons urging political activity also leads to community engagement. So urging your congregants to go out and vote leads them to also be engaged in the community. One really interesting finding here was that sermons about political topics, those are the divisive topics like abortion and same-sex marriage and religious freedom, those actually decreased community involvement, perhaps making people feel alienated because they can be such divisive issues, or perhaps introducing some cognitive dissonance if the member doesn't fully agree with the clergy message on that particular topic. Finally, what predicts political efficacy? Well, sermons urging community involvement predict political efficacy. So when you are hearing worship messages urging you to get involved in the community and to help those less fortunate to volunteer, that actually leads people to believe that their voice matters in politics and that they can make a difference. So it seems like, at least for the sample, political efficacy is really very local, and people are connecting it directly to making a difference in their own community. To summarize the key findings of this research, we find that sermons on political activity lead to greater political activity and greater community engagement. Sermons on political topics also lead to greater political activity and lower community engagement. Sermons on community engagement lead to greater community engagement and greater political efficacy. And community engagement by the religious organization leads to greater community engagement by the congregants. So to revisit the research question, recall that this project began with this puzzle that we saw in the health research, that if churches host health screenings, their congregants become healthier. Does the same thing happen for community and political engagement? Do churches that are more engaged in the community have more engaged congregants? And the answer is yes. Religious organizations that deliver positive community messages and are engaged in serving their communities have congregants that report higher levels of community engagement as well. And what we found when these religious organizations trusted us enough to invite us into their worship services and talk with us is they're doing a lot of good. Over 70% of the congregants we surveyed are serving in their place of worship and outside their place of worship. About a third of those gave at least 6 hours of service in the past month. These people are doing good work in their communities, both in their faith community and beyond. And they're doing it in what they perceive to be politically diverse congregations. Only about 56% of respondents say that their political views are about the same as the other congregation members, leaving nearly half of the people in our sample believing that their views are somewhat or very different from those they worship with. And yet they worship together. And yet they serve together. This is diversity of belief working hand in hand to serve each other and make their communities better. These results indicate that, at least for these congregations in Little Rock, politics isn't dividing our places of worship, just the opposite. At a time when so much seems to divide our country and our communities, religious organizations are a beacon of hope for healing communities and engaging citizens in the hard work of making their city a better place. More about that sounds like something you want to be a part of, please let me know. We expanded our study from 2012 to 2016, and we hope to grow even more in 2020 and to learn about a greater cross-section of the Little Rock religious community and better understand the great contributions they're making and the ways that they're positively impacting both their members and the broader community. Thank you so much.